My stepmom demanded my dad give her the keys to my birthday car, then smashed the windshield. When he said no, when I told him everything she'd done to me, he just sat there in silence while she slammed doors upstairs. That was 3 weeks ago. This morning, she was dragged out of court in handcuffs while screaming about loving too much. From day one, she demanded that I call her mom even though I didn't want to. I talked to my dad and thankfully he took my side, but she wasn't happy at all. Since my dad wasn't home much, she got permission from him to discipline me whenever I was out of line. If I didn't wash the dishes when she told me to, she would take my phone away and wouldn't give it back until the next day. This one time, I got really sick and was even having trouble standing up. But my stepmother thought that I was faking it and just trying to get off from going to school. So she forced me to put on some clothes and kicked me out, telling me to walk to school by myself. I cried the entire way and somehow made it to class, but fainted immediately because I had a high fever. My dad came home and took care of me, while my stepmother told him a lie about how she was worried and tried to prevent me from going. I tried to tell him the truth, but he didn't believe me and thought that I was just hallucinating, since his wife would never do that. I know this sounds weird, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that whenever my dad did come home, stepmom would demand that he take her on dates and spend time with her instead of me. I really wanted to go out with them and do fun activities with my dad, but at that time I was just too scared to speak up, so I would end up just staying home while my dad took his wife to see the world. But on my 16th birthday, I finally found the courage to call my dad and talk about what was going on with my stepmom. He still didn't believe me, but I think he realized that he needed to spend more time with me, or we won't have a relationship in the future. So he started taking me out to fishing, and even to some of his business trips. My stepmother didn't like that at all, and often threw tantrums about how I didn't need my dad, but she did. Thankfully, my dad still hung out with me and we became really close. He assured me that I could stay in his house for as long as I wanted and didn't have to move out at 18. Like always, my stepmother argued that what he told me was unfair, and the house belonged to her once I was an adult. But my dad quickly shot her down by saying that his son should always stay close to him. Now, I never asked my dad to leave his wife, or tried to stir up problems between them because I saw that he was genuinely happy with her sometimes. But on my 18th birthday, she officially took it too far. I was just relaxing at home, getting ready to leave and hang out with my friends. I thought that my dad was away on business again, and was going to miss my birthday like he did every single year. But out of nowhere, the doorbell rang, and my dad surprised me with a massive cake in his hands. I was about to cry when he shouted happy birthday and hugged him while saying, "You being here is the best gift, thanks Dad." But he told me to hold my horses, because he had another gift for me. He took me outside and showed me the new Toyota that he had bought for me. I never had an interest in sports cars even though I knew my dad could afford them, and just wanted a simple, reliable car that won't break down. So I was really happy and thanked him a lot. But then my stepmother came storming out of the house, screaming at us to stop. She started going on about how it was unfair that my dad had bought a car for me and not for her. According to her, I was perfectly capable of getting a job and buying my own stuff, and she was the one who needed help. She said that my dad can make this right by snatching the keys to the car from me and giving them to her. When me and my dad refused, she went absolutely ballistic. She grabbed a rock and threw it at the windshield, making a huge crack in it. Then she smirked and said that she would do it again if we didn't do what she had asked. I was about to say something when my dad surprised me by yelling at her and telling her to go inside. It was then that I realized that my stepmother hadn't even wished me a happy birthday and only talked to me so she could snatch away my gift. I also realized that if she cared so little about me, then there's no way she actually loved my dad and not just his money. While she stood there, still demanding that I hand over the car to her, I started making a plan about how to make my dad realize the same thing as me. Thankfully, my dad had changed from when he married her and didn't give in to her demands. When we were alone, I revealed to him all the abuse that his wife had put me through. He asked why I hadn't told him sooner, but honestly, I don't even know myself. I think it was because I wanted to protect his happiness, but I might have just been scared. I told my dad that this woman was just taking advantage of him and that he needed to divorce her. And he, still reeling from the shock that the woman he married was abusing his son behind his back, stayed silent for a minute before telling me that he'll consider it. However, I know from the look on his face that he no longer wants to be with her. Now, I have to find a way to be there when he breaks the news so I can see what sort of look she has on her face. I sat in my room that night staring at the ceiling while my mind raced with possibilities. The crack in my new car's windshield served as a perfect metaphor for what was happening to my dad's marriage. Every few minutes, I'd peek out my window at the Toyota sitting in the driveway, its damaged glass catching the streetlight. My stepmother had retreated to the master bedroom after Dad told her off, and I could hear her slamming drawers and muttering complaints through the thin walls. Dad knocked on my door around midnight. He looked exhausted, his shoulders sagging as he sat on the edge of my bed. His hands shook slightly as he rubbed his face, and I noticed new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He picked up my old baseball glove from my desk, turning it over in his hands like he was searching for answers in the worn leather. The next morning, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. I rushed downstairs to find my stepmother in the kitchen, surrounded by shattered plates. She'd apparently thrown them against the wall after finding out Dad had already called a lawyer. Her face was red and blotchy, mascara running down her cheeks as she pointed at me with a trembling finger. Dad stood in the doorway, still in his pajamas, holding his phone like a shield. She grabbed her purse and started shoving random items into it. The coffee maker, some silverware, even the toaster. Dad just watched, his expression completely blank. When she tried to take the painting his mother had given us, he finally stepped forward and gently removed it from her hands. She spun around and slapped him across the face, the sound echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot. I moved between them instinctively, my heart pounding. She looked at me with such hatred that I actually took a step back. Then she laughed, this harsh, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. She pushed past us both and headed for the garage, probably to damage my car again. Dad grabbed my arm before I could follow, shaking his head slowly. We heard her car screech out of the driveway moments later. Dad sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the broken dishes scattered across the floor. I grabbed the broom and started sweeping, needing something to do with my hands. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Over the next few days, things got progressively worse. My stepmother would show up at random times, banging on the door and screaming accusations. She called Dad's work and told his boss boss he was having an affair with his secretary. She posted on social media about how we'd stolen from her and kicked her out with nothing. Some of her friends started driving by the house slowly, taking pictures. Dad installed security cameras after she keyed his car one night. I helped him set them up, holding the ladder while he mounted them around the property. His hands were steady now, more determined than I'd seen him in years. He even smiled when he showed me how to access the footage on my phone, saying we needed to document everything for the divorce proceedings. The lawyer came by on Thursday afternoon. She was a sharp-dressed woman named Ms. Chen, who took notes on everything we told her. When I described the years of abuse, she asked detailed questions and recorded my answers. Dad sat beside me the whole time, occasionally squeezing my shoulder when the memories got difficult to share. I showed her old text messages where my stepmother had called me names and threatened to throw away my belongings. That weekend, we changed all the locks. The locksmith was a friendly guy who told us stories about other dramatic lock changes he'd done, trying to lighten the mood. Dad and I spent the afternoon moving my stepmother's remaining belongings into boxes in the garage. I found my old gaming console hidden in her closet. She'd taken it as punishment 2 years ago and never returned it. Dad's jaw tightened when he saw it. My friends came over that night to celebrate my birthday properly. We ordered pizza and played video games, and for a few hours, everything felt normal. Dad even joined us for a few rounds, laughing when he kept losing. But I caught him checking the security camera app on his phone every few minutes, and I knew he was worried about what she might do next. The police showed up on Monday morning. My stepmother had filed a report claiming we'd stolen valuable jewelry from her. The officers were professional, but clearly skeptical, especially after Dad showed them the security footage of her taking those same items when she left. They took our statements and said they'd follow up with her about filing a false report. I started documenting everything in a notebook. Dates, times, what she said or did. Dad's lawyer said it would help with the restraining order. My hand cramped from writing so much, but I wanted to make sure we had evidence of everything. I even took photos of the bruises on Dad's face from where she'd hit him, though he was embarrassed about it. School became my escape. I threw myself into my classes and spent extra time in the library, avoiding going home until I knew Dad would be there. My teachers noticed something was wrong, but I just told them we were dealing with family stuff. My chemistry teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, offered to let me eat lunch in his classroom if I needed a quiet place, which I appreciated more than I could express. The cafeteria incident happened on Tuesday. I was carrying my lunch tray when someone stuck their foot out, sending me sprawling across the floor. My food went everywhere, and the entire room erupted in laughter. When I looked up, I saw Jake Henderson standing there with his phone out, recording everything. His mother was one of my stepmother's closest friends, and apparently she'd been filling his head with stories about how Dad and I were criminals who'd robbed a poor woman. I cleaned myself up in the bathroom, trying to ignore the food stains on my shirt. When I came out, Mr. Rodriguez was waiting in the hallway. He'd heard about what happened and offered me a spare shirt from his gym bag. As I changed in his office, he mentioned that several teachers had noticed an increase in bullying directed at me. They were keeping an eye on things, but there wasn't much they could do about social media posts made outside school. That afternoon, Dad picked me up early. His face was grim as he showed me his phone. My stepmother had created a website called Justice for Stolen Property with our photos and address. She was asking for donations to help her fight against abusive men who steal from women. The site had already been shared hundreds of times, mostly by people who didn't even know us but loved a good victim story. We drove straight to the police station. The same officers from Monday took our report, but they explained that shutting down the website would take time. They suggested we stay somewhere else for a few nights, just to be safe. Dad's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white as we drove to a hotel on the other side of town. The hotel room felt strange and cramped. Dad sat on one bed making phone calls while I tried to do homework on the other. Every few minutes, his phone would buzz with another notification. Someone else sharing the website, another nasty comment, another threat. He eventually turned it off and threw it on the nightstand in frustration. Around 9 that night, the hotel phone rang. The front desk said someone was asking for us, claiming to be family. Dad told them not to give out our room number and called the police again. We spent the rest of the night taking turns keeping watch through the peephole, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Wednesday morning brought new problems. Dad's boss called to say he'd been getting non-stop calls about Dad being a thief and abuser. While his boss didn't believe the accusations, the disruption to business was becoming a serious issue. Dad spent an hour on the phone explaining the situation, his voice growing more strained with each minute. I convinced Dad to let me go to school, promising to text him every hour. The bullying had gotten worse overnight. Someone had printed out screenshots from my stepmother's website and taped them to my locker. In every class, I could hear whispers and see people pointing. Even some teachers looked at me differently, like they weren't sure what to believe. During lunch, I was hiding in Mr. Rodriguez's classroom when the principal came to find me. My stepmother had shown up at the school, demanding to speak with me about family property. The principal had refused to let her in, but she was still in the parking lot, telling anyone who would listen that I was a manipulative liar who'd turned her husband against her. The security guard eventually got her to leave, but not before she'd convinced several parents to complain about me being a bad influence on their children. The principal assured me that the school stood behind me, but suggested I might want to consider distance learning for a few days until things calmed down. Dad was furious when he picked me up, not at me, but at the situation. He'd spent the day dealing with more false reports. She'd called child services claiming he was neglecting me, reported his car as stolen, and even tried to freeze his bank accounts by claiming identity theft. Each accusation required hours of his time to disprove, and I could see the exhaustion wearing him down. We couldn't go back to the hotel because she'd somehow found out where we were staying. Instead, Dad drove us to his friend Nathan's house about an hour away. Nathan was a college buddy who'd been through his own messy divorce and understood what we were dealing with. He set us up in his guest room and promised not to tell anyone we were there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, watching the hate spread across social media. People I'd never met were calling me horrible names, sharing photos of our house and making threats. Some of her friends had started a hashtag, number Justice for Stolen Wife, that was gaining traction. The lies were spreading faster than we could counter them. Thursday was when things escalated beyond social media. Nathan woke us up early to say someone had called his work, asking if he was harboring criminals. Dad immediately called Ms. Chen, who advised us to start considering a defamation lawsuit in addition to the divorce proceedings. colleagues. She also recommended hiring a private investigator to document my stepmother's behavior. The private investigator, a former cop named Marcus, met us at a coffee shop that afternoon. He took detailed notes about everything that had happened and gave us small cameras to wear whenever we left Nathan's house. He also showed us how to properly document threats and harassment for legal purposes. His calm professionalism made me feel slightly safer, like we finally had someone on our side who knew how to fight back. We stopped by the house to grab more clothes and found the front yard destroyed. Someone had driven through Dad's carefully maintained garden, leaving deep tire tracks in the grass. The mailbox was smashed, and eggs had been thrown at the windows. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, came out to tell us she'd seen my stepmother there around 3 a.m. with a group of people, but she'd been too scared to call the police. Inside, things were worse. She still had a key to the shed out back and had used it to get tools. Every family photo that included me had been destroyed. Frames smashed, pictures torn to pieces. She'd spray-painted thief and liar on my bedroom walls. My clothes were cut up and scattered across the floor. But the worst part was finding my mother's jewelry box empty. Dad had given it to me after she died when I was 8, and it contained the few pieces I had to remember her by. Dad called the police while I sat on the front steps trying not to cry. The officers who responded were different from the ones we'd been dealing with, and they seemed overwhelmed by the extent of the damage. They took photos and wrote reports, but warned us that without video evidence directly showing her committing the vandalism, it would be hard to prove she was responsible. Marcus arrived while the police were still there. He walked through the house with a grim expression, taking his own photos and measurements. He found something the police had missed, a receipt from a hardware store stuck to the bottom of my stepmother's shoe print in the mud by the back door. It was dated from that morning and showed she'd purchased spray paint in the exact color used on my walls. We spent hours cleaning up what we could. Dad hired an emergency restoration service to deal with the paint, but they said it would take several days. As we packed more belongings to take to Nathan's, I found something that made my heart sink. My acceptance letter to the summer engineering program I'd applied to, torn into tiny pieces and stuffed in my trash can. The deadline to confirm enrollment had passed while we were dealing with everything else. Friday morning started with Dad getting a call from his lawyer. My stepmother had filed for spousal support, claiming Dad had abandoned her and left her destitute. She was asking for half of everything plus monthly payments. Ms. Chen said it was a common tactic to try to force a settlement, but it meant more legal fees and court appearances. I tried to attend school remotely, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, another notification would pop up on my phone. The harassment had spread beyond my stepmother's immediate circle. Strangers were now joining in, eager to be part of the drama. Someone had even started a podcast episode about toxic men who steal from their wives, featuring our story, or at least her version of it. That afternoon, Marcus called with his first report. He'd been following my stepmother and discovered she was staying at an expensive hotel downtown, paying with cash. He'd also photographed her meeting with at least 6 different people, apparently organizing some kind of campaign against us. Most disturbing, he'd overheard her on the phone discussing plans to make sure that kid pays for ruining everything. Dad decided we needed to be more proactive. He hired a social media specialist to help combat the online harassment and start telling our side of the story. The specialist, a young woman named Victoria, spent hours documenting all the false claims and creating a timeline of events with evidence. She also helped us file reports with various platforms to get the defamatory content removed. Saturday brought a new crisis. Jake Henderson's mother organized a protest outside our house. About 20 people showed up with signs calling us thieves and abusers. They live-streamed the whole thing, encouraging viewers to share our address and personal information. Nathan drove by to check on the house and sent us videos of the crowd throwing things at our windows and trampling what was left of the garden. The police eventually dispersed the crowd, but the damage was done. The live stream had been viewed thousands of times, and our address was now public knowledge. Dad made the difficult decision to hire security to watch the house 24/7 until we could figure out a more permanent solution. That evening, while reviewing security footage from the house, we discovered something interesting. My stepmother had been there during the protest, but she'd stayed in her car down the street, watching and texting on her phone. Marcus cross-referenced the timing and found that every escalation by the crowd coincided with her sending messages. She was orchestrating everything while maintaining plausible deniability. Sunday was supposed to be quieter, but my stepmother had other plans. She showed up at Nathan's house early in the morning, somehow having tracked us down. Nathan answered the door while Dad and I hid upstairs. She demanded to speak with her stolen family, claiming she just wanted to reconcile. When Nathan refused, she started screaming about kidnapping and false imprisonment. The commotion woke the entire neighborhood. Nathan's neighbors came out to see what was happening, and my stepmother immediately started telling them her sob story. She claimed Dad was abusive, that I was a pathological liar who'd poisoned him against her, and that Nathan was helping us hide stolen money. Some neighbors looked skeptical, but others seemed to be buying it. Nathan called the police while trying to get her to leave. She sat down on his front lawn and refused to move, putting on a performance worthy of an Oscar. She cried about being a victim, about losing her family, about just wanting to talk to her husband. By the time the police arrived, she'd gathered a small audience of sympathetic neighbors. The officers recognized her from previous reports and asked her to leave. She complied, but not before loudly announcing that she was being persecuted for loving too much and that the police were enabling abusers. As she drove away, she shouted that she'd be back with lawyers and reporters to expose the truth. We couldn't stay at Nathan's anymore. He'd already done so much for us, and we couldn't put him through more harassment. Dad booked us into a hotel under a fake name, paying cash to avoid leaving a digital trail. As we packed our things, Nathan apologized for his neighbors' reactions, but we assured him it wasn't his fault. The hotel was in a different city, far enough away that we hoped she couldn't find us immediately. Dad spent the evening on the phone with Ms. Chen, discussing options for expediting the restraining order. The legal process was frustratingly slow, and every day without protection meant more opportunities for escalation. Monday morning brought the worst development yet. I woke up to hundreds of notifications on my phone. Someone had created deepfake videos of me saying horrible things about my dead mother, about Dad, about wanting to hurt my stepmother. The videos looked disturbingly real, and they were spreading across every platform faster than we could report them. Victoria worked frantically to get the videos removed, improved, but new ones kept appearing. Each was more elaborate than the last, showing me supposedly admitting to crimes, making threats, and saying disgusting things I'd never even thought. The technology was sophisticated enough that even I almost believed them when I watched. Dad was on the phone with the FBI cybercrime division when Marcus called with urgent news. He'd been monitoring my stepmother's activities and discovered she'd hired someone to create the deepfakes. He had photos of her meeting with a known cybercriminal and recordings of her discussing what she wanted the videos to show. It was the smoking GN we needed, but getting law enforcement to act quickly was another matter. The school called to inform us that I was being suspended pending investigation. Even though they suspected the videos were fake, the backlash from parents was too intense to ignore. They recommended I finish the semester through homeschooling to avoid further disruption. Another piece of my normal life gone because of her vendetta. That afternoon, we met with a crisis management firm Dad had hired. They specialized in dealing with online harassment and reputation destruction. The team of experts laid out a comprehensive plan to fight back, but warned us it would be expensive and time-consuming. Dad didn't hesitate, saying protecting me was worth any cost. As the experts worked on our case, more disturbing information came to light. My stepmother had been planning this campaign for months, long before the birthday incident. She'd been collecting photos, saving messages out of context, and building a narrative that painted her as a victim. The car incident had just given her the excuse to launch her attack. Tuesday's crisis came in the form of a process server finding us at the hotel. My stepmother was suing me personally for emotional distress, claiming my lies had ruined her life. The lawsuit was frivolous, but it meant I'd need my own lawyer separate from Dad's. At 18, I was being dragged into adult legal battles I never asked for. Ms. Chen recommended a colleague who specialized in defending against harassment lawsuits. The new lawyer, Mr. Park, reviewed the case and immediately filed countersuits for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He said my stepmother had made a crucial mistake by targeting me directly. It opened her up to serious legal consequences. The rest of the week blurred together in a haze of legal meetings, evidence gathering, and constant vigilance. We moved hotels twice more after suspicious cars were spotted in the parking lot. Dad hired a bodyguard for me after someone tried to approach me at a gas station, claiming to be a reporter but acting aggressively when I refused to comment. Marcus's investigation uncovered more disturbing facts. My stepmother had maxed out credit cards in Dad's name before he could freeze them, funding her campaign of harassment. She'd also been in contact with several criminal elements, though Marcus couldn't determine exactly what she was planning. He increased his surveillance and warned us to be extra careful. By Friday, the stress was taking its toll on both of us. Dad had lost weight, his face gaunt from lack of sleep. I was having nightmares every night, constantly looking over my shoulder during the day. We were living like fugitives, all because someone couldn't accept that their marriage was over. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of my stepmother's friends, Mackenzie, reached out through Victoria. She'd been part of the initial group supporting my stepmother, but had grown uncomfortable with the escalating harassment. When she questioned the deepfake videos, my stepmother had turned on her, threatening to ruin her life too if she didn't fall in line. Mackenzie had secretly recorded their conversation. In it, my stepmother admitted to creating the videos, detailed her plans to destroy my future, and laughed about how easy it was to manipulate people into believing her lies. She even bragged about the jewelry she'd stolen from my room, saying I didn't deserve to have anything from my real mother. We immediately turned the recording over to law enforcement. With this evidence combined with Marcus's surveillance, they finally had enough to arrest her. The arrest happened on Saturday morning at the hotel where she was staying. Marcus was there to document it, sending us photos of her being led away in handcuffs while screaming about injustice. But even her arrest didn't end the nightmare immediately. Her flying monkeys continued the harassment, convinced she was being framed. The deepfake videos were still circulating, and the damage to our reputation seemed insurmountable. Dad's business had lost several major clients, and I'd missed the deadline for early admission to my dream college because I'd been too overwhelmed to complete the application. Sunday brought a small victory. The crisis management team had managed to get most of the major platforms to ban accounts sharing the deepfake videos. They'd also started a counter-narrative, sharing the real story with evidence. Slowly, public opinion began to shift as people realized they'd been manipulated. The bail hearing was on Monday. Dad and I sat in the courtroom as the prosecutor laid out the evidence against my stepmother. The judge, after reviewing everything, denied bail, citing her as a flight risk and danger to others. As they led her away, she stared at me with such venom that the bailiff stepped between us. Her lawyer approached us after the hearing, suggesting a deal. If we dropped the charges, she'd sign the divorce papers and disappear from our lives. Dad didn't even hesitate before refusing. Too much damage had been done to just walk away. She needed to face consequences for her actions. The next few days were spent rebuilding. We finally returned home, though it felt different now, violated by everything that had happened. The security company had installed a comprehensive system, and we kept the guards for another week just to be safe. Slowly, we started putting our lives back together. Some neighbors apologized for believing the lies. Mrs. Patterson baked us a casserole and cried about not calling the police sooner. A few of my classmates reached out, saying they'd never believed the videos and were sorry for not standing up for me. It didn't erase the hurt, but it helped to know not everyone had turned against us. The legal proceedings would continue for months, but at least the immediate danger had passed. Dad and I grew even closer through the ordeal. Our bond strengthened by surviving her attempts to destroy us. We started therapy together, working through the trauma and learning to trust again. As I sat in my repaired room, looking at the new paint covering her hateful words, I realized something important. She'd tried to break us, to turn everyone against us, to ruin our lives out of spite and greed. But we'd survived. We'd fought back, and in the end, her own hatred had been her downfall. The deepfakes were eventually traced back to her through digital forensics, adding cybercrimes to her growing list of charges. The stolen jewelry was recovered from her hotel room, along with detailed plans for further harassment. Each piece of evidence added years to her potential sentence. Marcus compiled his final report, a thick folder documenting months of stalking, harassment, and criminal behavior. It would be crucial for both the criminal case and our civil lawsuits. He'd become more than just an investigator. He'd been our protector when the system failed us. As we prepared for the long legal battle ahead, I thought about everything we'd lost. lost. My sense of security, my normal teenage life, Dad's business relationships, our peace of mind. But we'd also gained something, the knowledge that we could survive anything together, and that truth, eventually, wins out over lies. The road to recovery would be long, but we were ready to walk it together. The courtroom was packed for the preliminary hearing on Tuesday. I sat behind Dad, watching my stepmother enter in an orange jumpsuit, her wrists shackled. She'd lost weight in jail, her hair hanging limp around her face. When she saw us, her expression twisted into something ugly, before her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Vicht, laid out the charges methodically. Cyberstalking, criminal harassment, vandalism, identity theft, defamation, filing false police reports. The list went on for several minutes. With each charge, my stepmother's lawyer scribbled notes frantically, his face growing paler. Marcus testified first, presenting his surveillance evidence with military precision. He showed photos of my stepmother meeting with the cybercriminal, played audio recordings of her planning the harassment campaign, and presented receipts linking her to the vandalism. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. When Mackenzie took the stand, my stepmother actually gasped. Her former friend looked terrified but determined as she authenticated the recording where my stepmother had confessed everything. The audio played through the courtroom speakers, my stepmother's voice clear and damning as she laughed about destroying my future. During a recess, Jake Henderson approached me in the hallway. His face was red with embarrassment as he mumbled an apology for the cafeteria incident. He explained that his mother had shown him the website and convinced him I was dangerous. Now that the truth was out, several kids at school had turned on him for bullying me. I told him I understood being manipulated by adults you trusted. The afternoon session focused on the financial crimes. A forensic accountant testified about the credit cards my stepmother had opened in Dad's name, showing how she'd used the money to fund her harassment campaign. The total amount was staggering, over $40,000 in just 3 weeks. Dad's jaw clenched as each fraudulent charge was detailed. My stepmother's lawyer tried to argue that she'd been driven to desperation by our emotional abuse, but Ms. Vick shut him down quickly. She presented evidence that my stepmother had been planning this for months, including emails to friends discussing how to destroy me dating back to before my birthday. The premeditation was undeniable. Wednesday morning, Victoria testified about the deepfake videos. She'd worked with digital forensics experts to trace them back to the cybercriminal my stepmother had hired. The level of sophistication suggested significant planning and resources. The judge asked several technical questions, clearly disturbed by the implications of using such technology for harassment. Mr. Park presented our countersuits during his testimony. He detailed the damage to my education, Dad's business, and our mental health. He'd calculated the financial losses, Dad's lost clients, the security costs, hotel expenses, legal fees. The total was approaching 6 figures, not counting the emotional trauma we'd endured. That afternoon, more of my stepmother's victims came forward. 3 other families testified that she'd targeted them with similar campaigns over perceived slights. One woman broke down describing how my stepmother had tried to get her fired from her job for not inviting her to a neighborhood barbecue. The pattern of behavior stretched back years. The judge bound the case over for trial on all charges. As court adjourned, my stepmother's lawyer approached with another plea deal offer. This time, she was willing to plead guilty to some charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Ms. Vick said she'd consider it, but warned that any deal would include significant jail time and full restitution. Thursday brought an unexpected development. The FBI Cybercrime Division had expanded their investigation based on our case. They'd discovered that the cybercriminal my stepmother hired was part of a larger network selling deepfake services for harassment. Our case was helping them build prosecutions against multiple offenders. I spent the morning giving a detailed statement to federal investigators. They asked about every video, every post, every threat. The agent interviewing me, a young woman named Agent McAlexandra, assured me that they were taking this seriously. The deepfake technology was evolving rapidly, and they needed cases like ours to establish legal precedents. Dad met with his insurance company that afternoon. They'd initially refused to cover the vandalism damage, claiming it was a domestic dispute, but with the criminal charges filed, they were reconsidering. The adjuster who came to inspect the house seemed shocked by the extent of the damage, especially the destroyed family photos and spray-painted walls. Marcus stopped by that evening with his final surveillance report. He'd documented over 200 separate incidents of harassment, stalking, or criminal behavior. He'd also uncovered evidence that my stepmother had been hiding assets, money she'd siphoned from joint accounts over the years. Dad's lawyer would use this information in the divorce proceedings. Friday was my first day back at school since the suspension was lifted. The hallways felt different now. Some kids stared and whispered, but others nodded supportively. Jake Henderson publicly apologized in the cafeteria, admitting he'd been wrong to believe the lies. Mr. Rodriguez welcomed me back to chemistry class with genuine warmth. The principal called me to her office during lunch. She apologized for the suspension, explaining that the board had forced her hand due to parent complaints. Now that the truth was out, several of those parents had also apologized. She offered to write a letter to colleges explaining the situation and its impact on my academic performance. That afternoon, Dad's biggest client called. They'd seen the news coverage of the arrest and wanted to resume their contract. They even offered a bonus to compensate for the disruption. Dad's hands shook as he hung up the phone. The first good news we'd had in weeks starting to sink in. The weekend brought more positive developments. Our story had gained media attention, but Victoria managed it carefully. She helped us do one interview with a reputable journalist who focused on the dangers of deepfake technology and online harassment. The piece generated sympathy and support rather than more attacks. Neighbors organized a cleanup day for our yard. Mrs. Patterson coordinated everything, and dozens of people showed up with tools and plants. They repaired the garden, fixed the mailbox, and even painted over graffiti on our fence that we hadn't noticed. The gesture meant more than they probably realized. Nathan visited on Sunday, bringing takeout and normalcy. We watched movies and didn't talk about lawyers or court dates for a few hours. He mentioned that his neighbors had apologized after seeing the news coverage. Several had offered to testify as character witnesses if needed. Monday's mail brought an unexpected letter. The summer engineering program I'd missed had seen the news coverage. They were offering me a spot in their fall session with a partial scholarship. The director wrote that they understood extraordinary circumstances and and wanted to support students who'd overcome adversity. Ms. Chen called with updates on the divorce proceedings. With the criminal charges and evidence of hidden assets, my stepmother's position was untenable. Her lawyer was pushing her to settle quickly. The proposed agreement would give Dad full ownership of the house and most assets, plus spousal support would be off the table. The plea negotiations in the criminal case continued through the week. My stepmother was facing up to 15 years if convicted on all charges. Her lawyer was desperately trying to reduce that, but Ms. Vick held firm. Any deal had to include at least 5 years in prison, plus full restitution and a permanent restraining order. Tuesday afternoon, I met with a college counselor Mr. Rodriguez had recommended. She specialized in helping students who'd faced unusual circumstances. Together, we crafted application essays that addressed the situation honestly while focusing on resilience and growth. She was confident that colleges would understand the context of my disrupted senior year. The deepfake removal process continued slowly. Victoria worked with each platform individually, providing legal documentation to get the videos banned. Some sites were cooperative, others required multiple appeals. She estimated it would take months to fully clean up the digital footprint, but progress was steady. Dad's therapy sessions were helping him process the betrayal. He'd started recognizing the red flags he'd ignored during their marriage. The therapist helped him understand that his desire to provide me with a mother figure had blinded him to her true nature. He was working on forgiving himself for not protecting me sooner. Wednesday brought the news that 2 more of my stepmother's flying monkeys had been arrested. They'd continued harassing us even after her arrest, sending threats and trying to organize more protests. The police were taking a zero-tolerance approach now, and word was spreading that supporting her campaign had real consequences. The financial recovery began slowly. Dad's business picked up as clients returned and new ones heard about our story. He hired a temporary assistant to help manage the workload while he dealt with legal matters. The insurance settlement came through, covering most of the house repairs and security upgrades. By Thursday, life had developed a new rhythm. School felt almost normal, though I still ate lunch in Mr. Rodriguez's classroom sometimes. Dad and I had dinner together every night, something we'd rarely done before. We talked about everything, the case, college plans, or just random topics that had nothing to do with our situation. The pre-trial motions began on Friday. My stepmother's lawyer filed several attempts to dismiss charges or suppress evidence, all denied quickly. The judge seemed to have little patience for delay tactics. A trial date was set for 3 months out, giving both sides time to prepare. That weekend, I attended a friend's birthday party, the first social event I'd been to in months. Some people asked questions about everything that had happened, but most just treated me normally. It felt good to be a regular teenager for a few hours, even if I had to text Dad every hour to confirm I was safe. The plea deal came through on Monday. My stepmother agreed to plead guilty to multiple felonies in exchange for 8 years in prison. She'd serve at least 5 before being eligible for parole. The restitution order covered all our expenses plus punitive damages. She'd also agreed to the permanent restraining order and would be prohibited from using the internet for 5 years after release. Tuesday morning, we attended the plea hearing. My stepmother stood before the judge, her voice barely audible as she admitted to each crime. When asked if she had anything to say to us, she remained silent, her lawyer quickly intervening to move things along. Dad squeezed my hand as the judge accepted the plea and imposed the sentence. As the bailiffs led her away, she turned one last time. The hatred in her eyes hadn't dimmed, but it no longer had power over us. We'd won, not through revenge, but through truth and persistence. The courtroom doors closed behind her, and I knew that chapter of our lives was finally ending. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Vick congratulated us on staying strong throughout the ordeal. She mentioned that our case would be used in training materials for dealing with cyber harassment and deepfake crimes. We'd helped establish important precedents that would protect other victims. Dad and I drove home in comfortable silence. The Toyota, its windshield long since repaired, ran smoothly as we pulled into our driveway. The house looked different now, not just because of the repairs and security cameras, but because it felt like ours again. The ghost of her presence had finally been exorcised. That evening, we ordered pizza and sat on the couch, exhausted but relieved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, college applications, business meetings, the ongoing work of healing. But tonight, we were just a father and son who'd weathered the storm together. Dad fell asleep during the movie, and I covered him with a blanket, grateful for this moment of peace. The next morning arrived with sunlight streaming through windows no longer covered by security film. I made breakfast while Dad read the news on his tablet, occasionally sharing interesting articles. Life wasn't back to normal, it was better. We'd learned to appreciate these quiet moments, to communicate openly, to protect what mattered most. The ordeal had nearly broken us, but we'd emerged stronger and closer than ever.